Welcome to T&R Series, where I collaborate with special guests and often industry experts. I'm Tharmila Rajasingam, Realtor with eXp Realty Brokerage here in Toronto. Our channel is all about Toronto real estate investing, wealth, mindset, marketing, and personal branding. Subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and hit the notification bell to get updates on new content. This video, I got the chance to chat with Josh McDougall, licensed paralegal and owner of Your Legal Services, located in St. Catharines, Ontario. George has a broad experience in financial product sales, property management, and legal services. He opened his firm mainly practicing criminal law and now has grown into general practice. In expanding his personal practice and assisting existing clients, Josh began representing the Landlord and Tenants Board, assisting tenants, landlords, and managing and most legal affairs for property management companies. In addition to being a director of his own property management company and being a landlord as well, Josh's firm currently has over 400 active files at a given time. And Josh's property management company has over 80 units under management, with an additional 30 to be onboarded within the next 60 days. My husband and I had a chance to work with Josh when we were having our own tenant issues with our rental properties, and of course, working with Josh, we were able to resolve our issues. All in all, Josh is a super knowledgeable and trustworthy legal presence to have on your side. Now let's go check out my conversation that I had with Josh McDougall. Thank you for making time to chat with us today, Josh. And getting on the call. And I'm looking forward to giving people that are watching something that is super informative, and maybe we can keep this conversation going so that we can have people jump in and ask us questions and so on and so forth. Okay, so to start off, Josh, I have some questions for you in particular to your practice. So how did you get started in getting into real estate?
So I started off in a criminal and family law office where the lawyer practiced everything he could. So sometimes when you practice family law, you also practice real estate, just because it goes hand in hand, especially when there's a divorce. So when I started my own practice, I took his criminal law practice and made it my own and kind of expanded elsewhere. And that grew into doing landlord and tenant board. Laughingly, a lot of criminals have landlord and tenant board issues. And then it grew into when I would represent the tenant, who would also be my criminal client, then the landlords who own other properties that I would beat in hearings ended up wanting my help. So that's how I kind of got into the landlord and tenant board in a nutshell. And then as far as real estate is concerned, it's not me personally that does the real estate, it's my lawyer partner. And he handles all of our real estate. And again, it's to help my corporate landlord clients whenever they're making new purchases, as well as our family law clients whenever they're dealing with the divorce, like my original principal.
Wow, that's really interesting. So now I know you do a couple of different things now. So what are the services that you provide? I know you talked a little bit about, in our conversation, property management. So can you give everyone a little bit about all the type of services you provide?
Yeah, absolutely. So I own a few different companies. The first one is the firm. So it's Your Legal Services. I have two offices, one in downtown St. Catharines, the other on Main Street in Hamilton. We service everybody from Fort Erie in Niagara all the way into Ottawa. So we have clients everywhere. We offer every possible area law you can think of. You have to ask yourself, and it's the running joke, but if you want to ask yourself, do they do that? I can stop you right there, and yeah, we do it. And the whole idea behind that is I never wanted a client to ever come in and need assistance with one area, but then have to walk across the street to somebody else who didn't know anything about any of their other areas or matters or issues, and just give them advice solely based on the information before them in that specific area. So it's so that our clients can have a full, wholesome support system in place from a legal aspect. Then again, I have many corporate landlord clients. So what ended up happening was there was a consortium of us who required some property management assistance, and that's kind of how that sprung. it was a love child made overnight. It wasn't thought about. It was almost like an oopsie daisy, where it just kind of happened. We're up to 80 units now. I think we have another 30 or 40 onboarding shortly. So I mean, things are moving quickly. And that's the way I like to do things.
Yeah, I really like that. And I love people like you being part of our team, is because when we, you know, everyone who I work with are people that have background in investments and who understand, you know, working with landlords who've had tenants. And, you know, even my own mortgage agent, he is an investor. I have my lawyer, he is an investment real estate lawyer, like people that understand investment, people who are in the game, because it is a different language. And I'm really glad that you kind of touched upon the fact that you have background in property management, too, which is kind of interesting. So when you're helping or when you're assisting these people and your clients, whether they're landlords or tenants, you're really understanding their issue, and it isn't and you understand it from a personal level as well, so which is awesome. I don't know if this question is I don't know how easy it is to answer this, but what are some more frequent or common issues you deal with when it comes to tenants or landlords?
Rental arrears is usually the most common. It doesn't matter whether you're the tenant or you're the landlord, it's always the rent didn't get paid. I am one of the rare practitioners in the region, at least in the Niagara region, that heavily practice and represent for landlords, but still have a tenant base. There are a few practitioners in the region that exclusively do landlords, and they're older and well established in their field, but they won't touch tenants. And then there are other practitioners who, unfortunately, they just haven't broken into the landlord demographic, and they predominantly just help tenants. I'm in that fun situation, so I am able to play a fun little game with myself of, if I were representing the other side, how would I beat myself? And the biggest thing from my perspective, or from where I'm sitting, is always rental arrears. The tenant will always have a reason to not pay in their mind, whether it's legal or not. They have something in their head that says, well, I shouldn't have to pay rent because this happened. And a landlord, from an investment perspective, is just trying to make sure that they don't have to lay more money out of their pocket, cover an investment that should already be paying for itself.
Yeah.
Right. So it's that constant balance. Now, there are things in the Residential Tenancies Act that will assist a tenant when they have issues like that, if they deal with it correctly, which a landlord should try and safeguard. And the opposite is true for the landlord. These rights and provisions are in there to protect against, we call them slumlords. I mean, it's very rare nowadays where we have a true slumlord that's trying to take advantage of a tenant, but the laws are still in place to protect them because of those kinds of individuals. And now we have tenants that will take advantage of it. So from a landlord's perspective, they need to learn how to navigate through that to ensure that they get the desired outcome. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's sometimes you'll have requests that come in that might be super easy to deal with, and they're kind of black and white. And I know there are times there are issues that are complex and that takes a really long time. And whether it's a landlord issue or a tenant issue or whoever you're supporting, I mean, without giving too much info, can you give us an interesting, I guess, a complex a scenario there where you were involved, and someone like you was important, and I wanted to, in a little bit we'll get into the importance of having like you ahead of time in an issue, rather than once really when things fall apart, it's not the reason to call a paralegal, or anyone to just even have an advice from. So let's talk about an issue that you've had that.
So I mean, it's kind of like a bad recurring nightmare. It's not just one issue. It's something that I have seen many times over my career, and it will never stop. And it's because of a misconception. So what I'm talking about is when a real estate agent acts on behalf of a landlord, and you sell a multi-unit dwelling. And so what ends up happening is, if you have a duplex or a legal non-conforming triplex, where you could easily just knock out a wall and make it into a larger single family dwelling. A real estate agent will typically, in my experience, and I mean, this has happened to me more than once, more than 10 times, if I'm being honest, but it's what we think of from a business and investment perspective where it's easy. I mean, from a real estate or from an investor standpoint, that it's simple business. I'm ending my contract with you. I'm selling the property. I need you to leave. And then you're going to sell your investment to whoever wants to buy it for whatever way they can imagine using it. The Act doesn't support that. So whenever you sell a residence that has more than one tenancy, you can't sell for personal use. So the Residential Tenancies Act supports the idea that when there is a multi-dwelling, the new owner of that property takes over all the tenancies. So what ends up happening is you will get a real estate agent who is trying to sell a property based on its perceived property value instead of looking at it for what it is, which is a turnkey business. So the business is the tenants. The amount of money that the tenants contribute, which is government regulated because of the Residential Tenancies Act and the board, determines what the value of that business is on an annual basis. So you can't very well sell the property for 500 grand and the mortgage is going to be 2,200 a month if all that's coming in is 2,000. Does that make sense?
Yep, of course.
So that's the one leg of that problem scenario. The other problem scenario is that a real estate agent will sign the N12 document on behalf of the landlord as their rep, and it is a flawed application. And then by the time they've realized what's happened, or they realize they're going to get a little bit of a pushback from the tenant because they're asserting their rights to not just leave because they got an end notice. They call me, and then in review of it, I realize I have 3 weeks to convince somebody legally that they need to leave, because outside of that, the original owner is going to get sued because they're in breach of the purchase and sale.
Yeah, wow. You and I talked a little bit about this, and there was the danger of people, like the type of information people have access to, and often people go to people like an agent, or whether it's a real estate agent or their fellow friend who's been investing and been a landlord for a number of years. But again, it's not the same language, right? And I feel like, and you want to get the proper advice because it's that reoccurring nightmare. And if you get into the game and if you're not doing it properly, and you could have, like 3 months ago, put in the right notice that could have been a benefit to you in this point in time. Now you wasted 3 months. Recently when I was in the Facebook Ontario landlords page, I saw somebody post, they were reaching out to the community forum, and they said, hey, I have a tenant. This person hasn't paid me for X amount of time. And it was a fairly long time. It's over 6 months, it appeared. And they changed my lock. I can't get a hold of them. And can you help me? And I was like, whoa, how did you get to here? That somebody, first of all, no one can change the lock without your permission and without, and it's really interesting that, and the fact that this person had such a severe issue on their hand, but is going out and putting it on a public forum like that and asking people that aren't like myself and Josh, for example, like to reach out to people like you. And so I know you and I really touched up on that a little bit, of the danger of just going out and accessing the wrong information. So can we talk about what are some things landlords and tenants can do to avoid issues at a later date, and can resolve them up front, and some things do they keep in mind and be vigilant about?
I would suggest that everyone be proactive. Don't leave things and think that they're going to resolve themselves, or think that by asking nicely for the 4th time you're going to get paid the rent that is 2 months old. It is a common misconception. The purpose of an N4, an N5, an N12, an N8, whatever the notice number, the purpose behind them is to give notice to the tenants for whatever it is. If it's an N5, they have 7 days to correct their behavior. If it's an N4, they have 14 days to pay the balance of their rent. So what happens is I see often landlords will try and take an extra step, hoping that they don't have to go through the board process. And it's just something they keep on burying their heads in the sand and pushing it to the back of the pile of their to-do before you know it, because they wanted to take that extra step, or they didn't, or they wanted to ensure they didn't go to the board. They have now not received rent for 7 months. The tenant has now vacated, so it makes it harder to collect. And you're essentially holding the bag on the full amount with no form of recourse.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, the same argument can be made for a tenant. You need to be proactive. If you have issues with your landlord, then you need to address them. You need to document them. You need to make sure everything is in black and white.
Yes.
Unfortunately, sometimes like we just talked about with the real estate agent, where it's incorrect protocol or procedure or incorrect forms or structure, it can be construed as a coercion or harassment of the tenant. So if a tenant is facing all of those issues, they should document it. And that should further caution a landlord or whoever is acting in the capacity of their agent, whether it's a property manager or a real estate agent, which, by the way, is not a legal representative. I don't care what they tell you, they're not. But if they're acting in the capacity as the landlord's agent for the purpose of day-to-day, they need to watch out for the landlord's back in every way.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. And another thing that I've noticed about being proactive too is that documenting everything from the beginning. And I think that people forget that this is a business that they're running, right? And
Yep.
and I love that, for my case, mine and my partner, like our case, we're so happy we have a buffer. Obviously, we live in Toronto and our properties are in St. Catherine, but we have a buffer, and that buffer is our property management. And they document everything. And at the end of if there's a point where we need to be brought in, it doesn't start there, right? When the landlord is in communication. And I remember one of my tenant, it was my fault. She had an access to my phone number when I went to visit, when I first actually purchased the property and assumed the tenant. And actually you dealt with them and you helped me work with them and resolve that issue. And I wouldn't have known exactly, the right steps to take. And right before I even got on the phone with my property management, they're like, nope, we've already put in such and such notice. It was X amount of times late. And the part isn't, and the fact to your point, obviously frequently it's always been late rent, but there's a lot of things that add to your business that, maintenance call. They can be calling for things that aren't an issue, or they can be complaining, they can be damaging your property. Do you have documentations of your property before they had moved in? What had happened? And often I've noticed that, landlords and tenants, they get on the phone call and they make agreements, and then they come to the hearing and they have a totally different conversation. And I think that this is why it's so important to have conversation with people like you and document everything. So I'm really glad that I hope people watch this and take this as an opportunity, a learning opportunity, and really look at the way that their business is set up, and be, again, I think it's really important to provide a good space for good tenants, right? And vice versa. And same thing with tenants, right? I think often people think that you're both working together, and this person's providing you housing. In change, you take care of your home because this is your home now, and that it doesn't matter if you don't own it, this is your home. And I think people have a misconception of that, and if there's a little rebuttal or they run into an issue, they often blow it out of proportion, and now it becomes an issue that keeps building up, and they could have consulted somebody, they could have resolved it. And I'm really glad that having people like you to reach out to is so important. And I want to keep this conversation going. I brought this up to you. I want to post this in some of the Facebook groups. I want people to jump in and ask us questions, and I want you to be able to, and for myself to jump in and as an investor, but as a realtor who is an investor, I look at things differently. I was having a conversation with someone recently who said, because of the pandemic, my condo it doesn't have enough value, but I found a place, I'm moving out. I want to actually rent it out. I've never done this before. And she said, I want to rent it out to someone who's an employee, who's a friend of hers. And I cautioned against that, but I said, but vet them properly. And there's a lot of things you need to do to get the right tenant. And I said, are you comfortable with asking these questions? And then she's like, well, then if you're not comfortable with asking these questions and this tenant is uncomfortable with you giving, pictures of, their bank statements, access to their credit check, giving you access to contacting their employer, past landlords, all these things, then maybe they're not the right person for you, and they're hiding something. I'm not sure, right? Like you can make a lot of assumption out of that, but again, it's people often forget it's a business, and to keep an end goal in mind and ensuring that you don't run into these issues. And often you can find a really good tenant and still have these issues.
Absolutely.
And people forget that. But anyways, so what are some ways people can contact you, Josh?
The best way is my office. Someone always answers, and if on the off chance we don't, we return the phone calls. It's 905-641-4446.
Awesome. No, that's so great. And let's keep this conversation going. I want to be able to sit with you and talk about things that are more things to keep in mind when such and such issues arise, and so that people can have, it's so important to have a community forum that people can reach out to, but it's even more important to get these issues resolved with some sort of a professional on your hand, and even talking to someone who've done this before in the right way, right? There's always a right way to do something. So, and by law. So anyways, thank you so much for making time to have this conversation, to start this really important conversation, especially in this climate with a lot of people wanting to rent and wanting to move into the city or out of the city. It's a really good time to have this conversation, and I'm really happy that you were open to it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. Thank you, Josh.